I'm Doug Atkinson here at Solutions Review, and I want to thank all of our panelists and speakers for participating in this quarterly mini jam. These events have been wildly successful for us, helping to drive over 1 million subscribers to our YouTube channel. And of course, we are continuing to build the always-on community site at insidejam.com, where you can connect with experts like you'll see today, along with colleagues and peers, and continue the conversation around enterprise technology. If you haven't already joined insidejam.com, please do. And if you have, please invite a colleague to join as well. Thank you very much for being here, and enjoy this event.
Solutions Review presents Inside Jam, an enterprise technology community.
Hello and welcome to Insight Mini Jam. My name is Jonathan Paula. I am the Director of Multimedia and Events here at Solutions Review. Excited to MC another panel as we discuss Empathetic AI, embedding human values in governance and design. Donald, Dr. Susanna, Jason, Lindy, Mark, Noro, thank you so very much for joining me. It is a pleasure to welcome you inside Jam Live for this discussion. We'll start with some introductions. Donald, you've agreed to moderate. Welcome back, first and foremost. So let's start with you. 30 seconds or so. Tell the audience a bit about yourself.
Yeah, I'm Donald Farmer. I'm an independent advisor to all sorts of enterprises and software vendors. And my current project that I'm super focused on is working with Tranquilla AI, who are an AI company focused on delivering empathetic care, concierge, and comfort solutions for vulnerable individuals through organizations that care for them.
Excellent. Thanks for joining us and for moderating. Dr. Susanna, over to you.
Yeah, hi. I'm very happy to be here. I'm Susanna Hicks. I'm currently the AI program architect at Hummingbird Healthcare, where we're focused on making patient access as a service, utilizing AI and agentic AI solutions. My focus professionally is within the AI strategy and enablement leadership spot, which sits between technology and business. And I'm really happy to be here for such a great topic.
And we're happy to have you here. Jason, over to you. Welcome.
I am Jason Tay, calling from Australia. So I am an AI executive helping the startup and enterprise to build AI product. I'm also at the Global AI Ethics Institute. Basically, we help address the ethics, make sure that it's applied to AI through a cultural lens. I think this is really, really important, considering that all the AI technology currently really been building by the USA and also China. I think we do want to make sure that a lot of other cultural really represented in the AI. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. Thank you for joining. Lindy, over to you. Welcome.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. I am Lindy Hockenberry. I am a K-12 EdTech advisor. So I act like the bridge between technology and education, helping educators unpack the effects of emerging technologies on instruction and curriculum. So glad to be here today and bring the AI and education perspective.
Excellent. Thank you for joining us. Mark, over to you.
I'm Mark Mattson, and I'm the advisor. I work with a lot of organizations on not just AI, but AI and analytics and decision support, adoption, use, and application. And very happy to be here.
Happy to have you here. Last but not least, Noro, welcome.
Well, thank you for having me. I am Noro Salisi, data scientist and founder of Noro Insight. At Noro Insight, our mission is to simplify AI and data science so they are practical, trustworthy, and accessible, not just for businesses, but also for fresh learners. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you one and all again for joining us and giving us an hour of your time. I don't know much about this topic, so I'm going to let you experts discuss. Donald, take us away.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's a fascinating topic about empathetic AI and how we embed human values in governance and design of AI systems. And I think the first thing we need to talk about, especially for listeners, is what do we actually mean by empathetic AI? So I think we go around and maybe give our own personal views, and we may well find we have a wide variety of people from all over the world. So I think we may well have a wide variety of views on this. But let's think of this initial question: what is empathetic AI, and what does it mean in practice? And I'm going to take you not in order of empathy. I'll take you in order, just the order that we started as we did our introductions. So, Susanna, I mean, how do you think about empathy in AI? When
Yeah.
we talk about empathetic AI, what does that mean to you?
It is where we need to start, because we have to understand what it is that we're talking about, right? And for me, it's first of all, we need to be very clear. We're not talking about humans or machines feeling emotions. We know that that's not possible. That's not what it is. Nor do we want machines to mimic emotions, etc. So for me, it's about including guardrails and other mechanisms that provide trust and governance, and ultimately do no harm to the user in a way that allows the user to interact with an AI system with dignity and trustworthiness. And that usually happens, at least for me, in my experience, through proper governance.
Excellent. Thank you very much. That's a good start. Jason, what are your thoughts on that from Australia?
Well, I think there are two things that I probably would often consider. The really first one is really about to make sure that AI is avoiding any manipulation or harm to any human being on this planet. That's really important. I think there will be always some bad actors, but it's so important to get this right so that we can avoid that as much as possible. And then secondly is that it's about building that different diversity in terms of the cultural lens, that how the AI is applied. And that is something that I think the world is still thinking about, how to address this issue, and hopefully we'll get it right. That is how I would define the embedded AI.
Interesting. Thank you so much. Linda, what about your view from the education side? How do you see it?
Yeah, so in education, we talk a lot about safety, and a key word right now is anthropomorphism, which is a whole lot of syllables to say this idea of like giving human emotions and traits to AI. And so we're really trying to emphasize this idea that, just like Susanna said, it isn't about machines failing. Machines don't feel, they predict. Like AI is literally a predicting machine. So to define empathetic AI, I would really lean into that human dignity framing. Like Susanna said, it's about machines being designed to respect human dignity and prevent harm, right? Focusing on that safety aspect. In education, I would really say, and really not education, everything, like emphasizing that transparency is key. And to me, transparency in AI models is really empathy in action.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Super interesting. Mark, what about your views? You've often got a very technical perspective, and I wonder, have you got any kind of technical thoughts on these things?
No, actually, I think, oops, hey, there goes, it's earthquake. I think both Susanna and Lindy kind of actually said the technical bit that I would say, which is that they're machines, right? We imbue the machines with anthropomorphic qualities, and the real question behind that is not anything to do with technology, it's to do with design. And for me, if we're talking about empathy here, empathy lives in the designer, not the object that's been designed. And the interactions that we design into the software are the thing that matter. And if you ask, why do we anthropomorphize? It is specifically because we have taken a really sophisticated word prediction machine and put it into a chat interface, which feels like there's a mind on the other side. And that to me is very different than, say, a Google search summary where you type your familiar nodes and you get a response back and you don't think, well, there's a mind behind that. And so it's the design that causes this whole thing, and that design is a choice. And so for me, whether we want to reduce harm or support people, that's what matters.
Excellent. That's very, very interesting. I made a note here that empathy lives in the designer and not in the designed object. Yep. Expect a blog from me on that very soon. That's fantastic insight. What's your viewpoint on this? You're working very closely with AI system development. What's your view on what empathy is?
For me, actually, empathetic AI means like aligning technology with humans' dignity and values. For example, like if an AI or your chatbot say, "I'm sorry, you are not feeling well. Please rest and take care," instead of just saying like, "You may have a cold." It's so empathy along with information. So uh, that
Thank you, Nora. That raises for me a very important point. Having gone round the table, if you like, the virtual table. That one thing I noticed as we went around and answered the questions, there was a lot of negativity. Maybe not negativity is the right word, but we talked about preventing harm. We talked about guardrails. We talked about safety. I wonder, what about the positive side of empathy? Is there a positive side to building an empathetic AI? There's a lot to talk about the safety. I understand that, but let's flip it around. What's positive? If we can build an AI system which has these guardrails and is to a certain extent empathetic, is there a positive side to AI empathy that we could see emerging? Anybody got any thoughts on that?
I would say that when you get it right, which is difficult, that from a purely product standpoint or you'll get better user adoption, etc. People will come to trust the platform that they're interacting with, which will drive greater engagement and hopefully, especially if we're talking within a generative AI chat experience, will help them become more productive, more efficient, etc., without dampening their critical thinking, but allowing them to move on to limit the mundane and provide entryway into some of the more complex value-oriented work that perhaps they need to do. So if they don't trust the tool, then they're not going to use it. So if we can create a quote empathetic AI that they trust, that they know is not going to be biased, and I know we'll probably talk about biased against them, then they will use it and then move on to perhaps more value-oriented work. That's my first thought anyway, but very interesting.
I think the other thing that I would add to that is from the product of the AI companion product perspective is that if we get it right, I think it's going to be great from the addressing the biggest challenge that we all have, which is mental health. One thing that is already obvious from the use of the AI is that the AI is not judgmental. It doesn't care that I just go on forever and forever. And if we can get that right, I actually think that from the AI companion product perspective, it could really help that mental health. And maybe mental health is one of the things that we can solve with AI. Who knows? We'll see today.
Yeah, on that note, I was going to add that whether we like it or not, humans are using AI models for emotional support. And there's actually proof of this. Harvard Business Review has put up last few years, like the top 10 generative AI use cases. And in 2024, the number one was generating ideas of like how humans are using AI, specifically large language models. In 2025, the number one was therapy and companionship. And actually, the top 3 use cases in 2025 are all labeled as personal and professional support. So you asked on like, what's the pros and cons of that? I believe the pro is AI is making access to mental health support more equitable. Not everyone can afford professional help. I would actually argue that very small percentage of our human population can afford professional help. But the con is AI tends to tell you what you want to hear. And when it comes to kids, especially, and underdeveloped brains, we're starting to see stories in the media over the last year of some, and very few stories, but still really bad stories of kids that are using AI for mental health in really unhealthy ways, which is the opposite effect that we want.
Right.
I just want to add one more thing that in Asia, seeking help, mental support is actually seen a taboo thing. It's On top of the cost thing, which is like maybe more of an issue in the developed country, but in Asia, people actually avoid going there because they would think that going to get mental health support is like considered a crazy person. They would have to be sent to psychiatrists, right? So I that actually may open up lots of support for Asian in general. In Asia, that's what I think.
I find in my work
Wendy has addressed. Yeah.
Yeah, I find in my work with, say, veterans, for example, they're often reluctant to look for help. One thing I always want to make sure I talk about, though, is that, in a sense, AI cannot provide therapy. No, it's not a therapist. But that seems very important. It never has a theory. It never has a code of practice. It never creates a treatment plan. It's only just ever responding to questions. So it's never a therapist in that sense. And I think there's a difference between being an empathetic companion and being a therapist. Yeah.
If I could, I'd like to follow up on previous. Some of the things that Lindy was talking, I think that we're aligned in the do no harm and that it is possible to get this wrong. However, I think that there is a link to this idea of giving false, or that false isn't the right word. These models have a positive response bias. They are trained to provide us satisfying answers. And when used, as Lindy mentioned, particularly for adolescents who are going there for companionship or emotional support, that's where we see harm come into place, because the models are trained to provide a positive response. So I think there's an opportunity here to go back to the actual training of the models to make them more objective, as opposed to providing an answer that is, a happy response, to make them less sycophant, if you will.
Right.
And that can happen at the model development and training level, because right now they are very prone to giving an answer that is in line with what you typically that you're looking for to satisfy you, right? They are not going to say, I don't know. So I think there's an opportunity here for the developers actually to help us with this issue.
I think merely agreeing with you all the time isn't empathetic, right? That's the problem.
Right.
There's got to be, and challenging might not be empathetic either. I think this is where it gets really difficult. And you brought up very importantly, Susanna, the question of bias in here, that there's a sort of bias in these algorithms, but there's also other forms of bias that can, enter into these systems. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if you should talk about that. I think it was you that said we've got to talk about it, and we definitely do. Nora, I want to maybe start with the bias question from a different angle and think about when we are designing data sets and when we're designing data processes. As somebody who's kind of practicing in that field, how do you think about bias, and what kind of work can be done at the data set level about bias?
Actually, I think bias is one of the biggest barrier in empathetic AI. We see mainly in three types of bias, like data bias, when the training data is skewed or incomplete, and algorithm bias, and societal bias. Actually, the data bias is come from our societal things and company culture and all the things. So this is the main challenges we face to handle this empathy in AI, I think.
Yeah, I think I'm sure you're right there. Mark, how do you think about this? I mean, you've been involved in the world of data for a very long time. And I'm thinking here again, starting at the level of data and bias in data, what could be done to mitigate that?
That's a really good question. And I don't really have any good concrete answers because, in essence, it is a design question. The question is really, where does bias live? And in in this case, it lives in the performance of whatever application you have. And, what are the sources of that bias? And as Naro mentioned, it could be just in the choice of techniques. It could be in data used to construct the system. In the case of the psychophantic AI, which, sometimes does challenge you because it's not actually reasoning, it's just responding. The bias is inherent in the interaction between the individual and the machine. And so it's very context dependent. And, the way I look at it is, what kind of use do you have? Who are the people who are using the system? Who are the designers? And I go back to some of the AI research that kind of predates language models as such, like back around the 2015s when we talked about machine learning. And, one of the cores is, does the population of users look like the population of developers or creators? And, the leg that got left out back then was, what about the organizational management that wants to deploy it, whether it's a government, a corporation, school, the people who fund and direct it, do these people look like each other? And if they don't, you have a problem. And so a lot of it goes right back to the people in the system.
Interesting. Yeah, a systematic approach. Sorry.
I was going to say, to build on that, this is a huge discussion in education, and you really broke down, I think about the what and the who of AI training and AI training data, because AI is making predictions from its training data, right? We know that. Typically, those with access to technology are the ones represented in that training data, right? So we get this further widening equity gap and this endless cycle of those that don't have access to technology are the ones that aren't represented. That's the what. But then you also said, Mark, the who. We also have to think about who builds AI, and that matters as much as what data it trains on, in my opinion, especially framing it around education.
Interesting. Anybody else? That's a great point.
I think one thing that I think that is going to, that we'll get to at some point, but we're not there yet. As we know, when you're evaluating a system, whatever to bring into the enterprise, you do a security review. Hopefully you also are doing a privacy review. I would advocate that there needs to be a third leg to that stool, which would be a bias assessment, which, so that's something that I'm actually working on is there a way to create a bias assessment that the enterprise can actually realistically conduct to understand what bias might be there, to understand what populations might be harmed or not represented, etc. It's a very difficult thing right now, but I think it's an emerging, but I think it will be inevitable that we get there. We can see it already in some regulations, like in New York, for hiring, they have to do a bias assessment for any AI tools that are involved in hiring. It's now written into the law, and they have to do this, right? So I hope that's the way we're going, that it becomes a three-pronged assessment instead of just security.
I think that assessing that aspect of it is really important. I mean, one of the things I always say to my clients is you have to test for bias. Don't just wait till it turns up. But in order to test for it, you need a taxonomy of biases. Right. What is it you're actually testing for? I remember working a project where it was an automated hiring project for a company that did a lot of temporary hiring. And it turned out the system, because of various sort of things with the way people registered for shifts, was quite biased against single mothers who are very specific about the shifts they want to work. Well, we never tested for that. Nobody had ever sat down and said, we don't want to be biased against single mothers. It wasn't until we discovered we were that we could then implement a test to test for that. So in a sense, there's a real challenge of analyzing potential biases in advance. And I'd be fascinated to see your work develop, Susanna, on that.
Yeah.
Jason, you got any thoughts on that?
There's a lot of research over the years on the topic, but we didn't used to call it bias necessarily. And you think about clinical trials, women were excluded from clinical trials well into the 50s and 60s. And so medical models or medical treatment plans and protocols were designed specifically around averages that were not proper averages or that should have been categorized into multiple groups. And, I always go back to the systematic approach of what are you looking at? I will point out that in the data space in particular, Timnit, I can never remember how to pronounce her last name, Gabriel or Jabrew, who used to be at Washington, and I think Emily Bender came up with something that they called, it was mainly for data, whether it was machine learning or AI language data, called model scorecards, which had a set of characteristics to evaluate that I found helpful.
Google is now using those model cards. That's a great example, and it has been brought back and is being used. So I think we're heading in that direction. We're starting to see it here or there. I hope that it emerges as just as strong of something that we look into as we do security.
That reminded me one of the projects that we built on, which is the facial recognition system. That was a really clear data bias issue, which is one of the things that Donald wanted to address, right? Is that when we were building the facial recognition system, the data that we obtained, that we purchased, was heavily skewed to a certain race from a particular country, and that mainly because the most easily obtainable data was the photo that is taken as you have some criminal case, and that was one of the challenges that you always see in the data bias. So I think the question that we not only have to ask who is, what is the data is really available as well. We want to make sure that the data that's available, it really cover and represent a wide range of cultures and gender and socioeconomic background, making sure that it gives a voice to anyone and everyone, regardless what their perspective is. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would add, bias is a word thrown out there a lot. I always emphasize to educators when I'm training them, bias did not just pop out of nowhere when ChatGPT was released 3 years ago, right? AI models are biased because humans are biased. And we're really starting to see that the more AI models infiltrate every part of our life, we're starting to see it in everyday practice. A good example is this summer, Universal Studios opened a new park in Orlando, Florida, and their walkers were some combination of like face and voice scan. And most people were walking up and using them perfectly. They were opening, but many, many people of color reported that they had incredible difficulty opening their lockers. Right. So that's a great example of bias in AI in real life.
Yeah.
And that particular example of facial recognition is something, it's not even necessarily the AI that is biased. The sensors are biased. The sensors aren't sensitive enough to skin contrast to be able to pick up people with dark skins. So it's a systematic problem that goes right back. But I want to wrap up with bias by throwing one thing in there, which is we tend to talk about bias always as if it's negative. But actually, every algorithm, in a sense, is encoded bias. There are biases we do want. If you work for an insurance company and you're offering car insurance, you want to be biased against bad drivers.
Yes.
You're going to give different rates. That's a form of bias. It's a form of weighting in the algorithm to give a preferred result. And again, this is one of the reasons I think, go back to what you were saying, Susanna, that I think we need to be careful about identifying a taxonomy of biases that we want, the taxonomy of biases that we don't want. I think it's a real challenge. It's kind of fascinating. Yes. I think it brings us on to another question, which, if you don't mind, which would be this question of, and this again, it's already come up in many ways. We've touched on these things so much. Transparency and trust. Given that there's bias in systems, that we're trying to deal with it, given that we're talking about empathetic AI and systems aren't genuinely empathetic in the way that humans are, how do we build trust in these systems when they are, when we have these specific problems that can occur? And what role does, say, transparency play in that trust? And how can we be transparent about a system that, in many ways, the internal functionings of it, nobody knows what's going on? Who'd like to jump in on that?
I want to jump in.
You want to jump in? Okay.
I want to jump in. Because that question goes to the creation of the thing, whether it's your Facebook feed recommender, which classically isn't AI, or ChatGPT. What you have to understand, or maybe what needs to be disclosed, is the evaluation criteria. What's the reward model for the system, the application, the thing you built? Your example of bias was a good one. We should discriminate against bad drivers. The purpose of insurance is to cover everybody. So you've taken a local, organizational reward model and applied it to the point that you end up with a pool of uninsurable motorists, as opposed to the original intent of insurance, which was to cover everybody against these things so that you don't have bad drivers with no insurance driving around, and then your own insurance has to cover it and you absorb the cost. So it goes back to me to that topic of what's the reward function. And in the case of a sycophantic AI, and you want one to be a helpful AI, what did the chatbot makers or the LLM makers reward the model as? Was it engagement, so that you stay engaged and use the model and burn the tokens and use your subscription? And so by being more sycophantic, people stay more engaged? That's a cynical view. Or is it a simple limitation of the technology? These are correlational statistical engines. They are not reasoning, A implies B, B implies C, causal systems that can actually think rationally. And so if it retrieves a falsehood, it doesn't know that it's a falsehood, and it cannot verify that falsehood. And so when you challenge it, what is the design choice? Well, the design choice is to apologize and correct. The human perception might be, you lied. And in fact, I've reviewed so many chats where it is, why did you lie? You said you did X and you didn't do it, like in coding models. And so the reward function and the design, to me, are the key to understanding that.
That's right.
Maybe we just need to train people to write a better prompt to make sure that it always asks for source. So there's one thing that I certainly always do,
Maybe
right?
People adapt to the machine.
Yeah, it is. But I think the challenge with the probabilistic system is that it's so hard to explain it. So it's so important to make sure the system is always sharing where the source that is getting the data, and also giving those examples. But it also comes down to how to get the user to write a prompt to make sure that it asks for the source to be shared.
Yeah, to build off of that, I think so much of transparency right now, especially in the US, where we have no inkling of regulation. The EU, the European Union, passed their AI Act, over a year ago, I believe. And the US, we're going through 2 administrations now since ChatGPT was released, and we haven't even begun to think about that. So is that going to happen? I don't know. But I think at this point, and the way I'm framing it as an educator, is it has to be educated at the user level, that you have to learn how to critically evaluate AI outputs. And I tell everyone I teach, AI is only as good as its training data combined with that human prompt, like you said, Jason, right? And you have to know how to critically evaluate that output. And something I think about a lot, especially my focus in K-12 education, is there's different types of transparency. You've got technical transparency, like how the AI actually works, as well as more functional transparency, why you receive the output that you do, right? Both are essential, but different audiences need different levels of each. And there's a huge discussion right now on education of like how much AI literacy do we need educators and students to have? How much transparency education, AI literacy education, whatever you want to call it, do you want to give to teachers so they can pass on to their students, right?
No, I was wanting to ask you about this. Thinking about this question of literacy and transparency. When you're talking with your clients, how often does this come up? Do they ask for transparent systems? Is this a demand from clients, or is this something that we worry about as practitioners?
Yeah, actually, transparency is the foundation of AI. If people don't understand how a system works, they won't trust it. Actually, we need to do like explainability. Why did the AI make a decision, and disclosure, like what are the limits and traceability? Can we audit its decision? So this main thing is need to be ensure the client. And main challenges, I think, deep learning models are often black boxes, but even a simple human-friendly explanation can build trust.
I think that kind of touches on something Lindy was saying about literacy. Perhaps we can explain some of these decisions, but would the user understand the explanation? You have to have a certain degree of AI literacy in order to be able to trust the system in some ways. If you're AI illiterate, which is obviously a horrible thing to say, then you might just blindly trust it. Trust requires a degree of AI literacy. Is that right, Susanna?
Yeah, I education and literacy within the frameworks of my enablement frameworks is a key aspect. Data and AI are now the language of business. It's not going to go away. It's going to continue. It's going to become more prevalent. And I personally believe that regardless of your role, a certain baseline understanding of AI and data is needed, especially when it comes to being able to evaluate critically output that you receive when you're interacting with an AI platform. If the user does not have a baseline understanding, then they won't know to critically assess or review the output that they've received. So that's a big piece of how I approach it, is that you've got to have governance, but you must bring in education and literacy to the user.
Having discussed quite a lot about the kind of governance, if you like, governance aspects of AI and the empathetic side of that, let's think again about what we could do with an empathetic AI system. Why are we building manually? And what are the benefits of an empathetic AI? First of all, let's think about what would that actually look like? What would an empathetic AI look like in practice, and what would the benefits of that be? Anybody want to pick up on that? No benefits?
That is a tough question. Donald,
it wasn't meant to be. I thought we might be.
And I like that. I think getting that governance right is going to be challenging. I mean, before the AI, that was a lot of work that goes into the data governance already to avoid the bias. But in terms of the AI governance, I think it is still an evolving field that people are still working on it, including the big tech like the OpenAI or Google, DeepMind. They are still working on it. But I think from a lot of us, the way we can contribute is to make sure that our voice are heard, because we really do not want the AI to be built by just a few people on this planet, right? I mean, just by a few people that has got their voice heard. So I think that AI governance is still evolving, but it's so important to get it right. And what we can do as a practitioner is that to make sure that we are speaking on behalf of a lot of people that we all can represent, that we all want to represent. And that is, I think, the minimum that we can do.
Well, let's say we get it right, or let's say we get it half right, and we make some good progress towards governance. What are the benefits then of having an empathetic AI? If we get that right.
I think we've mentioned some of these in some of our contexts. We've talked about trust. We've talked about adoption. We've talked about protecting dignity when it comes to the user, at reducing harm. And I think the key is that if we do these things, if we can do that, then what it allows for is the expansion of human potential by advancing these other issues, which we've talked about in different frameworks in the different contexts during this conversation. But ultimately, what we're talking about is getting to the place where AI expands human potential. And that only happens if we've got adoption, trust, dignity, do no harm, reduction in bias, etc. The very things that we've talked about.
Yeah, I 100% echo that. That I remember being so excited. I'm a future forward thinker, and I had been playing around with generative AI for a while, but then ChatGPT's released. Now everybody has access to it for free that has a device and internet access, right? Like equity, yay, for generative AI, being so excited about the potential. That will be, I think, 3 years in November is the anniversary release of ChatGPT. In that 3 years, I went from that excitement and so much potential. And wow, think about what we could do as humans if we were able to take away all the drudgery and be able to spend our time and energy on more important things. But that hasn't been the last 3 years of my life. Working in K-12 education, it's instead been focused on AI literacy, educating people about the potential harms, educating people about transparency, about the importance of governance, right? Because the majority of AI models that we have out there right now are not practicing empathetic AI and safeguarding human dignity and prevent harm, to be quite honest.
I think one thing that perhaps we can add to that is that to have that accountability mechanism. So like if the AI really indeed does something wrong or something harmful, we should probably have a mechanic as a way to determine who is accountable, whether is that a data provider or developer, or maybe the company deploying it. And that's so many layers. So that is something that we want to address and start building, which is that accountability mechanism.
Yeah, and I would add to that, we talked about transparency. When those types of things happen, I think it's imperative that we're transparent that it occurred. We state it, we understand it. We don't try to brush it under the rug because that's just going to make it worse. That we surface that and try to get to the root cause and monitor. Can we get to the root cause to quote fix that issue? But it needs to be surfaced up for the whole organization to continue to trust these tools.
We need accountability. And right now, there's no accountability from the makers of these AI models, at least in the U.S. I can only speak for the U.S.
You know what? You mentioned transparency, and transparency has two aspects. One is make the thing visible, make the workings of this complicated machine visible. The alternative view is that it's invisible. And, my view of most of this technology is that we shouldn't have to know anything about it. I see that as a design failure, and that to answer Donald's question specifically of what would this look like, to me, it would be invisible. I don't think we should be seeing it.
Very interesting.
Because, number one, I'm kind of rejecting the premise that it is AI. There's different things, right? AlphaGo is a theorem prover, or not AlphaGo, sorry, that's a game player, but the one that does geometry and proving. right? It's a reasoning system. Generative AI, whether it's diffusion models for images or language models, are essentially predictor generators that don't think, that don't have causal reasoning and awareness and so on. And so really, to me, it's a UI, not an AI. It's a language interface to a computer, but the generative AI tech doesn't do things. It does translations into machine speak for retrieval purposes and fuzzy retrieval purposes, not real retrieval purposes, and not a whole lot else. And so, when I think about it, I feel like it is incumbent on us as providers or designers or the people in charge of getting systems built to make those things fit and to be invisible, and that people, what we are talking about is sort of the technocrat's view, where we're making the user or the person who's being forced to use it, we're making them adapt to the machine and do the cognitive work that we are unable to, because that's just how the thing works, or unwilling to, because it's just not how we've approached the problem.
Do you think that,
I think that transparency issue, I kind of agree to a certain extent. As an end user, we certainly don't really necessarily have to show that transparency at all level. But from the evaluator perspective, from the big tech perspective, from the developer perspective, and also more importantly, from the regulatory body's perspective, we certainly want to be able to make sure that it's transparent, so that when something goes wrong or even something goes really well, we want to have that ability to really understand how it works and why it happened. So I think to a certain extent, that transparency is still so important. Not necessarily
I can see that
to the end user at all time, but it's still important from that angle, because that is the only way for us to continue to evolve and improve it.
Yeah,
So
this is
we're very sorry, I was going to say we're kind of close to wrapping up time, and I think this is a great place to get to a wrapping up question. And I'm wondering about advice that we could give people. And in particular, think of, we might give advice to developers. We might give advice to people who are, running a business with AI, or we might give simply advice to people as end users, as users of AI. Perhaps you could go around and think of, given this thought about an empathetic systems, what advice would you give to somebody who's thinking about either using an AI in an empathetic context, or struggling with how they can make an AI more empathetic, if they're a developer, or have concerns about how they could deploy such a system? Noro, can we start with you? What would your advice be to somebody in one of those contexts?
First of all, we start with from data, and for data level, we can try to data security, data governance, and and data compliance and all the things. And mainly we focus on data security, because and data cleanness and all of the things. And then after that, we also teach the what is the model, machine learning things, all the things, how it works and how it can be traceable, how can be explainable to, and how this decision making decision happens from that algorithms and all the things. So it will be save the time and effort to build better AI systems and all the things. So we mainly focus on data and transparency.
Very kind of pragmatic data up approach. Yeah,
exactly. It's like holistic approach.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Susanna, you got any advice for people who might be listening from your perspective?
Yeah, I would say what I actually tell when I'm doing an enablement program, I always end with this thought, which is we've all heard the term human in the loop. So I try not to use that because it's a soundbite, but I explain that at the end of the day, when you are done interacting, maybe you've created content, you've created a framework, whatever it happens to be, using your AI solution. But at the end of the day, from the moment of the output, whether you share it or not, maybe you're using it as a companion, you as the user still own that output. You own the content. Certainly, absolutely. If you share that out, the AI doesn't, the ChatGPT doesn't own that output. You own that output. So it's incumbent on the user to review and understand that they are the ones that are putting that out there. And I would say that that's equally important, even if it's just myself and my ChatGPT, dialoguing. I still own it because it's based, the output is based on the prompts I gave it, right? So
that's super important.
At the end of the day, we own that. We own what the output is.
Yeah, great. Jason, your view? Do you have any advice for people from your perspective?
I think this is the advice I would say is the shared responsibility. I think we have been talking a lot about the responsibility by the big tech, by the developer, by the data provider, and equally from the policymaker, although it's still challenging for them to keep up. But the other part of things that we often miss out is the user. The end user are also meant to share and bear some responsibility as well, that they are using fairly and ethically. I mean, apart from expecting the AI to be ethical and to be responsible, the user ought to share some responsibility in many ways as well.
Yeah, I think that does echo what Susanna was saying. Lindy, from the educational perspective, what advice would you give?
Jason, you stole mine, so I'm going to build on it. I think with a technology that is so transformational and infiltrating every single part of our lives as human beings more and more every day, that we have to talk about the shared responsibility, just like Jason said. Developers designed for that positive human experience. I mean, really, you could argue that empathetic AI starts with the creators and developers. Policymakers have to enforce governance. And users, and I'll add to what you said, Jason, users need to be advocates. This is something that I stress to every educator and student that I talk to. You have to be advocate. You are only voiceless if you remain voiceless. If you express what you like, what you don't like, the things that you don't like where the technology is going, and express that as a member of society, then you now have a voice in the creation and shaping where this technology goes. I stress to teachers that those who interact with the technology shape where it goes. So if you take I'm powerless and I have nothing to do with this conversation, that's exactly what's going to happen, right? Mm-hmm.
This context of proactivity and responsibility seems to be super, super interesting. Mark, you've had longest to think about this, so we're expecting a really insightful last answer from you.
I like what Lindy said. We are treated to a supply-side economy when it comes to software technology. And so the suppliers give us stuff and we just take it as a given, or we accept it. And then we hand it to developers who are probably the last people in the world you want dealing with empathetic systems, because they're locked into building stuff forward based on what they've got, not what they could make or what's possible from that. And what she was saying is spot on. It's that our use shapes its evolution. What we choose to focus on shapes that. And so I feel like that's important. And for me, I take a very systematic view of things. I like to look at the larger context of, you're taking a model, let's, call it whatever. Are you just dealing with a function, a piece of something like an add-in to Excel that does something so you don't have to think about it? Are you replacing a task a person does? The function fits in a task, the task fits in a workflow, the workflow fits into an organizational process.
For sure.
And usually software people get the specs and don't see any of that.
Yeah.
So the question then is, who's upstream, who's downstream, or me, the individual, what is up or downstream? And so putting the use into the context and then taking the little diagram of your black box system that says it does this with these things, who are all the people? The operators, the developers, the managers. I think, when Jason was talking about one of the things, he mentioned exceptions. Well, who deals with an exception? Is it the operator, the developer, the user?
I need to deal with an exception here because I need to deal with an exception here and raise an exception because we're totally out of time. But fantastic. Thanks so much. This is so insightful. And we've lost our developer audience. Thanks, Marks. But excellent.
Great job, all. I wanted to come back in at the end of the show here and invite each of you an opportunity for some self-promotion. We'll go around counterclockwise. We'll start with Noro. Let's keep this real short, 15 seconds or so, Noro. Where would you like to send the audience?
So, I create a Noro Insight and for simplify AI and data science. So they are practical, trustworthy, and accessible. So you can learn from this platform, and especially it's for businesses, leaders, and learners. It's from beginner to intermediate level. So you can learn from this platform. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Appreciate it. Mark, real quick, where would you like to send the audience?
Personally, I focus on a lot of research-oriented questions. What can we use something for? How could it be used? Should it be used? And design. And so, if you're interested in anything related to decision support, analytics, or AI, and the design and building of systems or prototypes, that's the kind of thing I do.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us. Lindy, what would you like to
Yeah. So think of the Lindy Hawk. I'm the Lindy Hawk. So lindyhawk.com, LINDYHOC.com. I share a monthly newsletter that has been mostly completely focused on AI literacy. So I threw out that term. If you're wondering what that term means, come to my website, follow my socials, sign up for my newsletter. That is my gig.
Excellent. Appreciate that. Jason, over to you.
Well, I got a Substack newsletter. It's jpc10.substack.com, where I basically share deep dive strategy on how to build, launch, and scale AI product. Come and check it out, where I share more deep dive strategies.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us. Susanna.
Yeah, I would just, I'll keep it simple. Find me on LinkedIn. From there, you'll see all the activities that I've currently got going, including a link to my blog where I write about these types of topics all the time. So find me on LinkedIn.
Appreciate that. Last but not least, our moderator, Donald Farmer.
Oh, thank you very much. Find me on LinkedIn too. And I've got links to my newsletters and my blogs and all the different work that I do there. So thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you, one and all. Again, appreciate your time. As for the audience, if you'd like to dive deeper into this topic and learn more about enterprise technology, we encourage you to visit our always-on tech community at insightjam.com. Or if you'd like some more video content, please subscribe to our YouTube channel for weekly podcasts, panel highlights, expert advice, live programming, and a whole lot more. Speaking of that live programming, coming up in just a few short minutes, our next expert keynote with Laura Berland and Evan Harrell talking about the value of compassionate leadership in the age of AI. You don't want to miss that, but until then, thank you again for watching and listening. My name is John, and we'll see you next time. Thanks again.
For video highlights, replays, and more, visit insightjam.com.